So let me start once again by saying massive thank you. If that's okay, I'm going to sort of highlight your screen because nobody else wants to see
Yeah.
the rest of us. There we go. Yes, it changes the perspective a bit, doesn't it?
Well, I might just put my screen off so I can't see myself. Can you still see me?
Yes, we can still see you. And thank you again for your time. So
No problem.
audience today are a group of Year 10, Year 11, Year 12 and Year 13 photographers who are really excited about being able to talk to you. And we asked, obviously, a week ago for some questions. We asked them to have a look at your website and to think about how they might enter the creative industries and how they might end up where you are, or what other places within the creative industries there might be for them, as well as that. So I'm going to start with Anna's question. Anna's year 12, and she asked you 4 questions, so I might summarise them a little bit. She asked about developing concepts and working within a creative team, and how does that work? That balance between getting the best of all the people within your team.
That's a really good question, and it's very different for every job. So sometimes I will come up with my own ideas, and a lot of my personal projects will be me just coming up with something and I'll run it. Sometimes because I've got a creative service like an ad agency, the ideas will come from the creative team. Sometimes I'll be employed by an ad agency and the ideas will come from that ad agency. So it really is different every single time. And I think the thing that is the kind of the learning that I can give you guys from it is people never employ someone like me to just take a photograph or just make a film. They employ me for my opinion. And whether that's working with a junior creative or a senior executive creative or doing even my own things, a lot of what I'm doing is kind of looking at it from a cultural and social perspective. So I'm never really looking at like, oh, how am I going to do this? You know, how am I going to create this? The creation of it is something that's quite practical and pragmatic. But the kind of, is it a good idea, comes from me almost kind of like trying to put it through the lens of, will it be something that's useful? Will it change the conversation? Will it challenge people? Will it excite people? Will it sell the product that I'm selling? So I'm always kind of looking at it from that perspective. And then obviously there's creativity involved in the making of it, you know, like getting the moment, you know, or capturing a moment or creating the right kind of situation for two people to work together in front of the camera. There's a lot of creativity in that, but essentially ideas are put through the lens of a cultural perspective.
Thank you so much. So that makes me think about one of the other questions that Lauren, who's our year 13 principal student, asked, and she asked a really pertinent question. She simply said, when did you know that you had made it?
You never think you've made it. What I think probably happened to me is I became more relaxed about it. I felt like I'd achieved enough to you know, sort of feel comfortable that I didn't have to compete anymore. When I first started as a photographer, I was very competitive, and in fact a lot of photographers are very competitive with each other, with the industry. So you kind of, you know, you have a bit of a green-eyed monster with other photography, and I'm a big photography fan and film fan. So when other people do stuff, I'm very jealous that I didn't do it. But what has happened to me is because I've done so much, I've kind of been able to go, oh, I feel comfortable now. I don't have to feel that kind of need and desire to be better and better and better. But that doesn't mean that I think I've made it. I think I've done I've got a good archive, and I've got a good sort of set of work behind me. But actually, one of the weirdest things is if you lose the kind of passion to want to create something new, then you lose the ability to be a photographer or a director, because when you start, if people start dialing in, like just kind of doing it, you know, by the book, by the numbers, it never works. You know, the work is always kind of very average, and that's just inside you as a creative, to be pushing yourself and to be pushing what you're doing. And I think that the best example of it is when someone says, what's your favorite photograph or your best photograph? I always say my next photograph is the most important photograph. So and that is a thing that's just inside you, and it's like a hunger, which is why I called my magazine The Hunger.
That's fantastic. That actually answers one of the questions somebody asked. I can't remember who it was. What was your favorite photograph of all time? So you kind of answered that. Emily in year 12 talks about, and you've kind of touched on this already, what do you think the most crucial part of taking an image is, the most important element?
There's so many layers in taking a good picture. The essential things for me, and it's not always, you know, like sometimes I'll do things like, I did a Battersea Dogs Home project about 4 or 5 years ago, and I literally was just trying to remind people that there are dogs that need homes, and it was a very practical, just taking great pictures of dogs and getting that place as a PR campaign. So there are sometimes you just do take pictures for the sake of taking pictures, because I know that practically I can take those and I don't have to worry about them. But essentially what I'm always looking for, and then my two things, is that the picture makes you think something and feel something at the same time. And that goes for film as well. So if you watch something or you see a picture, a photograph, and it makes you think and feel, then generally it's a successful picture. And I'm always trying to do that, even in the ones that are very practical, kind of, you know, just doing the job of taking the photographs. I'm still trying to do that. So but there's so many other layers, and when it gets to a complex picture, like an art picture, there's loads and loads going on in the picture. It's not just as simple as kind of like you know, taking something that represents something.
I'm just, as you were explaining that, I'm thinking of that photograph, the MenCat campaign that you did. Quite a confrontational pose, and
yeah, and that's, you know, that's a combination of understanding the subject matter, really getting below the surface of what maybe public consciousness is around it, and pushing something in a way that is very emotional. So yeah, the thing about great photography is that generally the people that are making it have a combination of a love for the subject matter they're making, and are also intellectually constructing the image. So they're not, you know, they're not just, I mean, it sounds pretentious, but they're not just clicking the shutter release. You know, they're trying to emote something with the picture, and that comes with a lot of intellectual understanding of how people read pictures, and that's why I always say to people, go to college and study photography. Yeah, you can go and become a photography assistant and learn how to take a picture, but actually reading about photography and reading about film and reading about the history of it and understanding how it appeals to people, especially in an age when everybody's using it. There's a really good quote that someone I learned about sort of 10 years ago, and I've kind of done it all my life, but and it really applies to photographers, professional photographers, and it's very much a documentary concept. But when you pick up a camera, you have a responsibility. You have a responsibility to yourself. You have a responsibility to the audience that are seeing it, but you have a responsibility to the subject. And if you kind of have that in the back of your mind, you know, when you look at a TikTok video or a photograph on Instagram where people they've not studied photography, they don't really understand the how deep it is and how meaningful it is and how much it can change people's opinions, and how empowering it can be and how disempowering it can be in terms of your self-image and all of these things. It's like that, you know, that study of it is really important to being a great photographer. So some people have it that inherently, like David Bailey is just inherently someone that gets that and knows how to use it. But I've studied it and I love it, and I always recommend that people do that.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Actually, okay, so Ruby in year 10 asked about those personal qualities you've just hinted at. What would you say are the most valuable personal qualities that a creative young person needs?
I would say the empathizing with your subject and your audience is the most important thing. If you don't understand what you're making something for and who's going to receive it and absorb it or digest it or consume it, then you're never going to understand how to make it. So you have to have that empathy and that love of connecting with people and communicating with people. And if you've got that, then I think most people can be creative. And it's a bit of a kind of fallacy that, you know, photographers and directors are the only two people, you know, that make things. It's like when I make a film, there's probably 50 people on set with me, and they're all incredibly important. So yes, you can be the solo photographer that goes out and does documentary, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But it's it's something I would have loved to have done. But there's so much work around being a creative that you can there's so many jobs in the creative industries, and I think it's like we're one of the highest you know, turnovers of the GDP. Like creativity is a massive part of British business now, and actually is one of the things that people still believe that Britain is one of the best countries for is creativity. And I think it comes from us being very inquisitive people and being very kind of wanting to communicate and wanting to understand and you know, wanting to make things that are unique and original.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. That's part of why we're doing this, of course, is we're trying to open the doors. And you mentioned multiple people on a set, and of course, I wonder whether the young people in this session understand how many jobs there are. I mean, and
many jobs. There's so many jobs. There's literally hundreds of jobs around creativity, and you might think that you're, you know, if you're like somebody that's really good with money and practical and you're like, I'm not creative, you know, those types of people are really needed in the creative industry, because you have to have a producer that puts the structure of a shoot together, does the budgets, make sure that people are paid, you know, make sure they get the right talent, and just doing a call sheet, you know, like someone has to do a call sheet, and that's all the people that are going to turn up on the day. And you know, if you get that wrong, the whole shoot goes wrong. So we're very much a kind of machine of creativity, and that creativity, I find that most of the best people that do it and are in the business and do well have a lot of respect for all the components. The person that drives you to set in the morning, you know, if they don't get up, I've been in a situation where the driver didn't turn up and we all just stood there and everything was 3 hours late. So, you know, things like that happen, and when it happens, you know, it's a problem. So we all rely on each other, and there's so many jobs, like literally hundreds of jobs.
That's fantastic. Thank you. So changing tack slightly, Izzy in year 13, who I must mention has just been really successful in university applications. So we were currently very proud of her.
Well done, Izzy.
She was really interested in the relationship between you and your models, and how it is that you elicit the response from them that you get, and how, you know, how do you manage that? Is it really important to develop a personal relationship with the models and the people you're working with?
I mean, a lot of people think I'm a fashion photographer, and I'm not really a fashion photographer. So I don't tend to do a lot of work with models. I used to do more in the 90s. And I think for me, I mean, when I choose my models, people assume that you choose models or subjects for shoots based on what people look like, and it's entirely not true in my situation, because I always choose people who have got an incredible personality, really want to be there and enjoy the process of doing what we're doing, you know, want to be collaborative within it, want to listen, want to kind of bring their own creativity to it. So, and then the final thing is, you know, what someone possibly looks like. So for me, when you work for a professional model, that kind of relationship isn't really hard because they're already doing it every single day. So it's, you know, they can turn it on and turn it off. And one of the things I always say to young photographers is, you know, never assume that the model is being performative for you. You know, they're being performative for the camera. So, you know, it's very important to have that distance in a way, or the kind of separation of the camera and the person you're photographing, because, you know, you can easily kind of, especially when a model is particularly good at working with the camera, you can start to think, oh, that's, you know, this is about me, or the relationship. And it generally, not, I'd say 99 million times out of 100 million, whatever, you know, like,
yeah,
it's about a relationship between the person and the camera. And that's kind of what you have to really sort of push, is that it's about the relationship with the camera. So when I photograph people that haven't been photographed, or generally are very nervous in front of a camera, which a lot of people are, what I'm saying is think about the person that's looking, you know, at you through the camera. And I always say, you know, imagine a friend, or like imagine a family that you're close to, watching you. If it's on TV, say if it's a film, I'm like, imagine one person or two people that you really like, and you're trying to kind of emote to, or tell the story to. But with professionals, that is literally a switch. You know, they turn it on and turn it off. With people that aren't professionals, it's more just making them feel comfortable that it's a collaboration, and it's not, you know, like stealing the soul, or it's not putting them under a microscope. I think a lot of people feel that they're being judged in professional photography. So if they're a person that's not used to that, they immediately go to, how was I? Was I okay? And most of the time I'm going, no, I don't want you to think about that. I want you to think about your personality, and I want you to think about the character, and I want you to think about, you know, your relationship with the person that's going to look at the photo, not the crew, you know, the 100 people watching you being photographed or filmed.
Thank you. I was going to add to that, but I won't, because I'll be filling in my own questions when I'm not asking the questions to kids. Georgia, who's in year 12, asked a fantastic question, which I hope you find as interesting as I did. She just asked what the definition of photography is.
How long is a piece of string? Like, you know, especially these days, Georgia, like, you know, everybody's a photographer, everyone's got a camera, and there's something incredibly exciting about that, but there's also something very soul destroying for somebody that is and has been a photographer for a long time, and I love the medium. And it's kind of just taken for granted now, you know, that anyone can take a good picture because the cameras are so amazing. So for me, photography, as I said before, is about telling a story and reaching people, and maybe changing their minds, or making them feel something and think something, and whether that's making them laugh or cry. So for me, it's one of the most powerful mediums, and it's also one of the most used mediums now. So, you know, we're taking a lot of what it is for granted, unfortunately. And I do think what's really exciting is that people are becoming more creative and understanding, and wanting to know the history of it more, and wanting to know, you know, what it means, a photograph. But as I said earlier on, you know, you can just click it. And I've always said throughout my career that I could teach anyone to take a good photograph. What separates a good photograph from a good photographer is a good photographer takes good photographs every single time and never fails in taking good photographs. And they seem very similar, but they're very, very different. Like, if I mess up a shoot, that's it. You know, I'll never work with that client again. So I just don't mess shoots up. So I haven't probably messed a shoot up since the kind of late 90s. So that's a good 20 years of not messing up. And that's a super important part of what I do, not messing up.
Okay, so link to that. Right. So, and this has just occurred to me. So it's a job. This is your career.
Yeah. It's a passion that you make a job of. So, and because it's a business, it's a bit like the show business mantra, you know. So there's, you know, it's not show friends, it's show business, you know. So it's literally, you know, you can be mates with people in this industry, and if you mess it up, that's it, you know, that you're persona non grata. So, and that's a lot of pressure on especially young photographers, because, you know, yeah, you can turn up with your phone and take some nice photos, but that kind of staying in the business for as long as I've stayed in the business for means that I constantly have to be shape shifting and doing new things and challenging myself and trying different things out and being aware of the technology and leaning into the technology and learning the technology and getting the most out of the technology and looking at what the new trends are in photography. But if you just go in, and I have so many friends that this happened to, and they're trendy for like a couple of years, like 5 years, and they go up and they've got this amazing ascent to being a successful photographer, and then they come straight back down because they've not realized that, you know, just being consistently you know, one thing doesn't really work. You can't do it and last the kind of test of time. What you have to do is adapt a bit to what people need and want. And also, and that goes back to my first answer, which is the culture and society change, and trends change, moods change, attitudes change, opinions change. And if you're not aware of that, and in fact, if you're not at the front of that, then you don't last.
That's brilliant. Thank you. One last question, because I think we're running close to the end of our time, and once again, thank you so much. What do you believe there's an intrinsic value in being a creative young person, studying the creative arts, studying photography, studying art, just for the sake of doing it?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that the thing about being culturally educated is that you understand the whole world a lot better. And I would always recommend, even if you're into science, you know, reading things. People ask me where I got my inspiration from, and I say reading. I read so much, and I watch a lot of documentaries, and most photographers are very inquisitive. So they're always looking at what's going on and what's changing in the world, and what, you know, how the world's unbalanced. And I think I would always recommend the arts and humanities as something you should at least be interested in, because even if you go to become an accountant or a solicitor, it has such an impact on you in later life. And also it's more fun, let's be honest, you know, like reading English or you know, watching films. You know, you can study film studies. That's one of the most amazing things to study, because yeah, you've got to write a couple of essays, but you get to watch loads of films.
Yeah, absolutely. My own daughter's doing film studies, so she would agree with you completely.
Film studies is the best. I did English. I basically was doing maths, physics when I was at school, when I was their age. And then I met a girl, and she kind of made me realize there was another world, and picked up a camera, and I'd never looked back. But I was doing accountancy when I first started photography. And when I went back to college, I studied photography, English, and film studies, and they're the three of the best things I've ever studied. So I would always recommend you do one humanities subject.
Right. You still love it in a way.
Yeah, I love it. I love it every day. Like, it's hard sort of sitting at home during lockdown, especially the first one. It was hard not, you know, being able to connect with people, but I ended up shooting lots of flowers. So that was kind of, I started talking to them and became a bit of a mad photographer in my spare room. But yeah, I mean, one person will ask me, what do I love about photography? I'll say light. Another person will ask me, and I'll say people. You know, it's like at the moment today in Suffolk, the light is just incredible. So part of me wants to go out and photograph the icicles, but I want to phone to you.
Well, we don't want to keep you away from your desire to go and photograph icicles. Thank you so much for your time.
That's cool.
Genuinely, we can't believe how lucky we are. And
that's all right. Does anyone have any other random questions they want to ask?
Speak up, guys. Now's your one and only chance.
I did. I read something about. Well, I did a little bit of reading, but you've got a compact camera that you use that you love. Is that right?
I used to have one, yeah, called a Yashica, which I would carry around, and it's like a point and shoot. But I mean, everyone just uses their phone.
Would you advise people to always have a camera as opposed to rely on their phone, or?
I think if you want to learn about photography, use a camera and do a bit of film, because the difference between digital and film is very simple. Film is something that's precious. It costs money. You have to think about what you're shooting. You have to consider it. Whereas a phone, it's all so easy and it's so cheap. And it's like, do both. Don't just do one. Do both. But one of them will teach you to think about sort of what you're shooting, and the other one will teach you not to be scared to shoot. And that's really the difference. And it's a very, I mean, it seems like all the best things in life are simple. It seems like a simple division, but it really works because you really think about it. I'm lucky because I did both. So I shot on film for like 15, nearly 20 years. So I had all that experience. So I never really look at my camera like that. I'm always looking around and then take the picture. And the other thing is, you've got to fall in love with light. Sorry, you've got to fall in love with light. Like, for the first 2 years of me being a photographer, all I did was look at the world and how I would photograph it. Like, so you just start to think about how would I get an exposure out of that? How would I, and you never stop learning as a photographer. Technically, I learn something all the time because it's so technical and there's so many things you can learn. So if you use film, or a film camera of any description, you're learning all the time.
Fantastic. Any other questions? Anybody? You've got time for another question?
I watched your interview with Stephen Bartlett, and you said that people were born with a spark and you can nurture your spark. How do you nurture your spark?
It's hard. That's a tough question, actually. I think that I was very lucky to be born with that spark, and I think I was very privileged in the sense that my parents were very working class, but they were very supportive of me, and it took me a long time to realize that different people have very, very, very different backgrounds and have I always thought the world I was quite optimistic and rose tinted, and everyone was, you know, as positive as I was, so I was always a bit disappointed that when people weren't. And what I came to sort of doing therapy, what I came to realize is that actually everyone's got a different journey, and I would say if you've got any spark within you, or when I meet someone with one, you just have to encourage it in yourself or in that person, because it is easy to dampen it, especially at the moment. It's easy to be negative, and I tend to, like, I come alive when I pick up a camera and I'm in front. Like, I was shooting yesterday, and it was like, I was shooting a dog in a car, and it was like I was buzzing. You know, it was like a drug for me. It was like, oh, this is amazing. So I think just kind of protecting that is really important. I make sure, like, I take photographs as much as I can. So like, when I went into lockdown, I know it sounds mental, but like, for me, shooting flowers became like this sort of daily, I don't know, almost therapy. It was almost therapy doing it. And because of that, I could keep my connection with what the spark was. So I think a lot of people worry about creating stuff. And I've got a different perspective, which is just make it. Don't talk about it. Don't overthink it. Just make it, because especially when you're younger and you make things, you learn so much from making them. So that's why after 30 years of doing this, I just make stuff. I just make it. I don't try and overthink it, because I get so much out of that. So that's how I protect it, by just making it.
Is that what you would say to younger people in the industry if they wanted to be a photographer? Is that their number one?
One of the things I always say is don't think about being a photographer. Take photographs. You know, that's what digital's great. Why it's great, because you can just take them, and you should just, especially when you start, you should just be absolutely obsessed by it. It should be, you know, you should, like an example for me would be I'm doing a pitch for a project at the moment, and my wife is like, "What's wrong with you?" And I'm just like, I'm obsessed by this pitch. I'm obsessed by it. I want to make it happen. So I'm dreaming it. I'm eating it. I'm sleeping it. I'm just like, oh, everyone's going. It's not just a hobby for you. It's like it's an addiction. And I think lots of people say that's not healthy, and I'm like, it's absolutely healthy for me because it keeps me pushing myself and making stuff that excites me. So when I got that dog in the car yesterday, people were laughing at me because I was like literally bouncing off the walls, going, just that this is so exciting. And it was just a dog in a car. It wasn't that big a deal.
Lauren, you got any questions?
Yeah, I've got too many. How would you say that you're able to do projects that you enjoy and make money from it and create a career from it?
If I could put that in, a bottle and, sell it, I would make a lot of money. I don't know, like that's probably one of the toughest questions you've asked, because I think probably the benefit that I had from being from a very practical background of, maths and physics and accountancy, and because I didn't have any formal education or understanding of photography before I picked up a camera, it meant that I didn't have anything that had been kind of like passed down to me by anyone. So I didn't have my parents saying, oh, that's a good film, or this is a good photographer. Or my mum and dad used to call the people that made advertising they, and they'd be like, oh, they did such a great job with that R. White's ad, or they made such a great film, or then they called everybody they, that were in that industry. So I always thought of it as very separate and impossible to be part of, which it isn't. It's really possible to be part of. So, because when I came to it, I was very like an open blank canvas or blank book. So all of my taste and all of my attitudes to it were very from a kind of individual place. They weren't passed down. And I think because of that, I've always been very passionate about every level. So when something is commercial, down here, it doesn't feel like that to me. I've got it up here. So I approach everything with the same enthusiasm, and because of that, I don't think anything is below me or think anything is not artistic or creative. And I don't think my experience can be sort of copied or duplicated. I just have that approach to it, which means that I don't ever put my nose up at something and go, well, that's not good enough, or like I'm too good for that. And then because I've got the business part of me, I've just been very lucky that I'm always thinking about the cash flow and the P&L at the same time, and are we making money? So, and I've always invested. So I've made lots and lots of money in my career, but I've always invested it back into the business. So I've never, I haven't got a yacht, I haven't got an island, I haven't got, I didn't buy a house till I was like 40, stuff like that. So I've always invested in myself, and I really believe that photographers or creatives that don't do that are always at a disadvantage to those that do, because the ones that do have always got the edge. That's why I could never be a fashion photographer, because if you've met fashion photographers, if you've met a really true fashion photographer, they're so obsessed and so sort of narrow and so kind of competitive in that industry, that they love clothes, they love fashion, they love it like it's like a love affair. And I never had that. I always used fashion as a way of kind of perpetuating an idea, or I was seduced by it, but I never loved it, if that makes sense. It was always like, oh, I love looking at this and being part of it, but I don't wake up thinking about a dress or a coat or a hat. Or they're more props in my photography.
To elevate your photography.
Yeah, I use it as, what's great about fashion is it's very seductive. So using the kind of the way you put a fashion image together, whether it's a beautiful subject or the aesthetic or the contrast or the lighting, they're all very seductive things. So, and they all sort of trigger stuff in our brains that are amazing. So I use that and then try and slip in an idea or put something in it that kind of makes you question it, or I kind of enjoy that part of it, and maybe, you know, put in a subject that's kind of like, you know, a bit different, or, you know, making people go, what's that person doing in a fashion picture? So I've really always enjoyed that and having a sense of humor about it. So yeah, I use the seduction to kind of create ideas or help people consume ideas.
I think this would probably be useful for most people, but how do you go from studying photography in college and film in college to doing this full time? Where do you get into, how do you pave your foot into the creative field?
Well, quite honestly, it's different for everyone, but what I would always recommend is that you try and find photographers, or, you know, stylists, or whatever area you want to get into. You find people that you love in that area, and you literally, you know, send them emails and knock on their door, and don't ask them to give you a job. Ask them for their opinion on your work and where you're coming from. And I think if you do that, people love to be asked their opinion because they love opinions, especially in my industry. So if you're trying to work to their ego and sort of, you know, massage their ego a little bit with, I just think your work's great, and could you just give me your opinion on mine? Slowly but surely you'll get knowledge of people, and that's the way to get in to do, I don't know, a work experience or an internship, or literally knock on doors, you know, send emails, be polite, be inquisitive, be, you know, when people talk about art, I always say go to shows, you know, go to private views. It's really, normally it's really easy to work out when a private view is. The night before something opens, there's normally a private view. So you just rock up, you know, and go in, say, I'm a student, I'm a big fan, you know, charm your way in, and or stand outside and someone will let you in. It's like, it's not, I mean, it feels like it's like really a walled garden, the industry, but it isn't if you just approach it in a kind of like, it's like trying to get into a nightclub, you know, it's like, you just got to have a bit of, you know, a bit of attitude and a bit of confidence and a bit of chat, you know, and if you haven't got the chat, like, practice the chat.
Yeah. I think this is the last question, but what does a typical day of yours look like? I know you wake up at 5 a.m. and that's insane to me that you even do that.
It actually changed a lot, you know, like I think before lockdown I was waking up at 5 a.m. but during lockdown I started to go to bed a bit later and my day changed. But I mean, I still wake up early because I have a kind of fixed set of things that I have to do. Like I have to do about 2 hours of emails at some point in the day. I've got to do pre-production meetings. I've got to do, you know, it's very different now. But it used to be I'd wake up, I would walk my dogs, I'd do my emails, and then I'd walk my dogs, one or the other. And I walk the dogs because I love the ability to go and not have to have any contact with the world, but really think. Because what you do as a creative is you have to think, you have to read, and you have to think. So thinking about those things really important. And then I would generally go into work, check hair and makeup, or check the set, or check what's going on. Then I'll probably shoot for a few hours, which is quite nice, because especially doing stills, because you have this moment. Like yesterday, I had I had 3 subjects, so there wasn't really a moment to stop. But normally it's just one subject or one model. So you have this moment when someone has to change, and you've got like 5 minutes or 10 minutes to have a moment, check your emails, check in with people, chat, have a bit of a laugh, then go to lunch. And then normally over lunch I do a couple of meetings or a phone call, and then 2 to 3 hours in the afternoon, maybe 4, of shooting. Probably finish about 6, and then I would normally do another couple of meetings, and then I would come home, have my dinner, and I would probably do about an hour's worth of emails. And that's a kind of normal day.
You mentioned that you should email photographers that inspire you. What photographers inspired you in your career path?
Well, just to be honest with you, too many to mention. I'm a really big fan of photography, like I said earlier. So I'm really, I'm always looking at photographers and photography. So I'm always getting suggestions from people. So there are so many, but I think what I find with kind of the generation above you is that their knowledge of photography, like my assistant's knowledge of photography, is not anywhere near what my knowledge was, and my peers' knowledge was when I was their age. So, for example, I'll say to them, "Have you seen a film?" And they'll say no, and I'm like, "That's like, as a photographer, to not have seen that film would be unheard of during my generation's sort of education." And I think that my recommendation to all young photographers is study photographers. Like, go, if you can, start at A. Photographers, literally in Google, photographers whose names begin with A, and start at A and then work your way through. And if you want to start with women photographers, start with women photographers that begin with A, or black photographers that begin with A, because there's a wealth of amazing talent out there that just looking at their work, it will teach you what works and what doesn't work. And don't take my advice on who to look at. They're all my photographers. Find your photographers, because I promise you they're all, and there's also loads of really amazing young photographers that are doing incredible work. There's a girl called Nadia Lee Cohen who just did a book called, I think it's called 100 Women, that's extraordinary. And her work is reminiscent of kind of Miles Aldridge's work in terms of color. So it's kind of quite pop. She's got a bit of kind of drag photography in there, and it's amazing, really powerful stuff. So there are so many, and normally what is interesting, it's a bit like music. It's like when you look at one photographer, that'll lead you on to another photographer, and another photographer and another photographer and another, so you just have got to be open to it. So there's no rules. This is the other thing. There's no fixed way of getting into the creative industries. You have to find your own way. So imagine you're climbing, the Himalayas, and you haven't got a Sherpa and you haven't got anyone guiding you, and start at the bottom and just be determined to get to the top. And if you do that, and if you don't, it's great to get advice from people, great to listen to people like me, but my advice would be find your own road, try and find your own route, because that's what I did, and it's still benefiting me today that I don't do it the way that other people tell me to do it. Because like, I've got a thing when people say no, I go, why no, why not, why are you saying no to me? I don't understand no. So I'm a kind of like yes or a maybe kind of person. Like, find the way. And that goes for everything. That goes for we can't shoot there, I can't make that happen. I'm like, but why? Prove to me you can't make it. And normally what's interesting about that is that people hate to have to prove that they can't do it. So then it's much harder to prove it to me than to actually just go and do it. So they end up going and doing it.
So Rankin, you've just
All
met,
right.
Yeah.
you've just met Lauren.
Oh, no.
Lauren's passionate about photography. You might have detected that. I mean,
Got that.
yeah. And thank you, Lauren, for so many excellent questions.
You're welcome.
But it sounds, Lauren, that you should be a journalist, not a photographer.
Not particularly.
What?
I think, I don't know.
She's upset.
Photography and filmmaking.
Documentary, then, maybe.
Oh, maybe. I'll keep an open mind.
Just keep making stuff. That's the main thing.
Yeah.
And never be, the one piece of advice I would give all of you is never think something's too big or too complicated to do, because it isn't. Like everything, the fact is that everything you've seen and everything that's been made is being made by human beings. So it's extraordinary that we can do that, but it doesn't mean that you can't. And that's like just being that idea, like of the they just being you or us is really important. And when I realized that, it was the biggest breakthrough. The two breakthroughs for me is when I picked up a camera, looked through it for the first time and took a picture and went, that's so powerful and it's so magical, because I've just put my view of the world into a picture. And that means that I can really talk to people and influence people, because this is a form of communication. That was the first thing. And then the second thing was when I went to college, and I walked into college on the first day at the London College of Printing, which is now called the London College of Communication. And I remember going in, and they gave this amazing girl gave me a magazine. She had red hair. I remember her, she was really glamorous. And she gave me this magazine. She went, "This is the college magazine." And I went, "Wow." And I started looking at it. And because she was glamorous and everything, I thought I'd hang around. And I was looking at it, and I was like, "Wow, this is amazing. Who made this?" And she said, "We made it." And I went, "What, you mean you people at college made this thing?" And she went, "Yeah, we made it. I'm the editor." And I was like, "Oh, okay, so I could make this with you." And she was like, "Yeah, you could make the next one with us." And that was the biggest breakthrough, because till then I hadn't realized that I could make a magazine. And from there on in, I never ever thought, "Oh, I can't do that," because someone out there's doing it. And if someone out there's doing it, you can do it.
You're open to all different mediums.
Exactly.
I love that.
All right, cool. I'm afraid I've got to go and talk boring money conversations.
Thank you so much. That final piece of advice, that anything is possible for any one of them, I think will stay with them all. And
it really is. And I wouldn't say it if it isn't. And don't ever let yourself be fooled. That goes to your spark question. Don't let anyone tell you can't, because it's bull.
That's fantastic. That's our quote for the interview. Thank you very much indeed.